Okay, we're good to go? All right. First of all, Wills, it's great to see you. Turn your video on so I can see you, brother. There you go. How you doing, man? Yeah, that's good. So Wills is this DITP graduate of this last year and was a faithful servant intern, and I was just really thrilled to see you on, brother. Great to see you. We spent some time together over the last year at Lubbock in the program. All right, so tonight I wanted to address, I think I was asked to address sort of the process on maybe a practical principle and practical level of establishing oversight. So in order to do that, what I'd like to do is to kind of describe the situation that the Lord had us go through, and then illustrate the principles and practices that we gathered from that, principles from the Word of God, practices and implementation. So I'll be brief on this because I think I described this to the group before, but as you may recall, our assembly had no elders. We had no elders for approximately 20 years. And there was reasons for that, including infighting and just flesh, just a lot of flesh. Now, that's important that you hear that, because we recognize that in the process of recognizing elders, flesh can easily enter in. But we started with lots of flesh. Brothers didn't like each other. They hated each other, in fact, and brothers were arguing and having public accusations. So when we came along to this assembly, which was definitely a crippled assembly, we were the only family. And you know, so as my wife and I, our daughter was about 2. And in that one family, we were the Sunday school, the young people, you know, the children's club, because that's all they had. There was no one else. So over those next 15 years, as our children, we had more children and we worked in the assembly, we saw that there was no eldership. And so we would ask, well, why don't we have elders? And it was always met with a very stoic sort of response, as if to say, well, you know, we don't talk about that. But it came out eventually that there was all this flesh. And so what do you do when you have a problem like that? Well, what the Lord taught us was that he taught us to pray. And so, as I mentioned, I think in a previous session, a brother and I had the same burden, and we prayed every week for 5 years, And we saw God do amazing things. But one of the things that he did was that he, first of all, showed us the biblical need for oversight. Because at that time, they had tried oversight, and because they fought so much, the oversight imploded and a bunch of people left. And so, of course, they thought, this oversight thing sounds great on paper, but it doesn't work in life. And so nobody wanted to reinvest the energy to try it again. And so the Lord allowed us problems, probably maybe like you might have problems, to highlight that we needed this, not only because it was biblical, but it was because we needed it for survival. So those problems, there was 2 specific ones that could only have been solved if you had recognized oversight. If you didn't have recognized oversight, every person in the assembly felt that they had a right to command opinion on these problems, and therefore should be followed. So it was, as you can imagine, it was just a free-for-all, no order from an administrative decision-making level. So that was clearly not the right way to go. So when we started to ask the question about elders, we began to, we did it in the context of prayer. And I want that to be very clear. Prayer was not for us just the prayer meeting. Prayer was me meeting with one guy to pray every week for 5 years, meeting with another guy to pray about this at the assembly, meeting with another guy. So there was multiple prayer, small group prayers, usually just 2 of us, that we were praying multiple times in a week just about this, not because frequency was the issue, but earnest was the issue. Fervency was the demand. And, how do you display fervency? Well, it's so much on your mind, you can't get away from it. So that was very important as we learned that. That was a very important principle from the word get-go. Now, as we did that, the Lord then began to deal with flesh. And as you can imagine, when you don't have elders, and now we're more friendly to the concept, there are different ones that feel that they should be an elder. They should be part of the group calling the shots or making the decisions and providing the leadership. But what we learned from the previous generation was that the flesh can fool you. And we had flesh. We had the previous flesh had been taken away, but we had neo flesh, the new part, the new ones that had been there had been thinking from a power grid level. And what the Lord did is, as we continued to pray, he was able to weed out that power grid focus. One brother, for example, said to me, Steve, you're influential here, so why don't you take all the money that the chapel has and divert it through the business meeting, that's how we're functioning, to my missions work. Well, I said, first of all, that is, I don't have that kind of power. And secondly, that's not a decision that we arbitrarily make. We seek the Lord's face, and the Lord tells us what to do, not me dictate. We'll see that. We hear that. That's flesh. That's all flesh. And we had other brothers that felt that he came to my father-in-law actually and said, hey, why don't you and I be elders, and we'll tell all these young people how to do it, and then they'll get it straight. That's not how elders are identified. And so that made us ask the question, well, how do we identify elders? So I would like to suggest that there are about 3 very, very important points on the triangle. And whatever you decide, 4 points on the square, and whatever you decide, you stay in the middle of that sandbox. So the first thing that I want to suggest to you is that it says, recognize those who labor among you. So there's 2 very important words. One's a verb and one's an adjective, or a preposition. And the verb is labor. There is a certain kind of labor that's done. It's a specific labor of shepherding. And so when we talked last, I described a bit of that labor of shepherding. And the reason why I mention that is because the word recognize in the New Testament is associated with labor. And so it's intuitive then that what you're recognizing is the work that's being done by this individual. And the work that's being done is not, it's a shepherding work. And so it's caring for souls. It's teaching the word, it's living the word, it's adorning the doctrine with your life. It's a man that is convicted to pray. It's someone who is looking after the needs of the spiritual needs of the assembly. That's the labor. And then notice it says, recognize those who labor among you. The word among, that preposition, is this idea that you are in the center of the flock, and the flock therefore knows you, and you know the flock. And so those 2 aspects are pretty important when it comes to seeing who's doing the work of the shepherd, that the work is being done. So we can talk about what that work is, but it's taking care of God's people, especially with the word of God, defending the word of God. But they're doing so in the middle of the flock. They're there. They're part of the fiber and vitality of the flock. And for many years, I just realized whatever the work was, I was going to do it. Whatever it was, I was going to do it. And so if the work needed the dishes washed, I'd wash the dishes. But if the work required me to go visit somebody in the hospital, I would go do that. And over time, I ended up gravitating more to that work. So it's recognize those who labor among you. It's not shepherding from afar, it's shepherding in the moment. All right, so that's one corner of the triangle, of the square. What's the other corners? Well, the other corner is this idea of qualifications, right? Now, and those qualifications, you should understand, I did the statistics, it's 92% focused on your character. For example, not drunk with wine, not a brawler, right? Not someone who's argumentative is a derivative of one of those Greek words. And so the point is that it's very character driven. All right. There is about 10% of the qualifications that deal with defending the truth. That is a very hard measurement. It's a metric that you can measure defending the truth. But character, now that character is pretty important. So when you talk about recognizing elders, of course, you're talking about their work, but you're talking about their character, their Christ-likeness. The Word of God calls it blamelessness, and then gives you about 15 descriptions of blamelessness. Now, the third thing that's a part of this triangle is not just the idea of the qualifications, but it says that they must have a desire. He who desires the work of an elder desires a good thing. Now, the problem with that is most men who are doing the work and are qualified are also very humble men. So if I go up to somebody, we'll say Matt, for instance, and say, Matt, do you desire the work of the elder? Matt's going to be so humble and says, oh, I would never presume that upon myself. Well, that's because you asked the wrong question. Ask this question, Brother Matt, if God had called you to serve as a shepherd, would you be willing to serve? Is that something that you have a burden for? Now, when you ask the question that way, and you remove this sort of self-elevation element, what happens is he's free to answer from the burden of his soul, the desire part. And that's pretty important for us to look for. Now, there's a final point on the square or the rectangle that you should look for. And that comes out of Acts 28. And it says there that the Spirit of God raised you up as elders. He's the one who did it. So there's a passage in the middle of Acts that talks about Paul and his co-worker coming back through the region and appointing elders, right? And so there's been a lot of articles written around about the word appointed from various scholars, and there's been a fair amount of debate, and some would say, well, it was apostolic authority, and so the apostles have to do it. We don't have apostles, so we wouldn't be able to appoint elders. I would certainly in no way pretend to be smarter than men before me, but I do have to confess that seems like an unattainable position, because if that were true, then pretty much the passages that Paul, an apostle, wrote on qualifications and the injunction to recognize those who labor among you are all negated. I often found it difficult to come to a conclusion about the scriptures when I negate large sections of other scriptures. That's a warning sign. And so I don't think that position is attainable. The position I think is attainable is to understand the word there, appointed. Now, some would say, oh, it means to vote. It means the root word means to raise your hand. And so when in our culture, we think, well, if you raise your hand, we're taking a vote. How many want steak tonight? How many want chicken? That's not the idea. In this situation, it's a raising of hand of agreement. So instead of voting, what you're doing is you're discerning, right? You're discerning. That's the key word. The Spirit of God is already identifying, manufacturing, working in these men's lives to make them qualified, to give them the energy to take care of the shepherding work with the right heart and the good attitude, as 1 Peter 5 talks about. He's putting that desire in them. What we do as a body is we say, now listen, what is the Spirit of God doing? who might we see the Spirit of God as raising up as elders? Now, those are four corners on this sandbox. And whatever precise mechanism you decide to implement that, or to implement to come to the conclusion, you must stay within those boundaries, all right? So how did we do it, or what was an example? Well, the first thing we did, which I think was an error, is we taught on qualifications. The second thing we did is we then went to the brothers and sisters in the assembly. We called them family units. So if you were single, you were a family unit. And if you were married, you were a family unit. And we asked them this question: who do you see doing the work of the elder? Now, remember what we did. We taught on qualifications, but we asked who's doing the work. How do you think they're going to answer that question? Well, they're going to answer the question based on the teaching they heard, which was qualifications. But we asked about the work. What we should have done is taught on the work of the elder, so that the framework would be that of someone who's laboring. I think we made a tactical mistake. It took us a while to work that through. I had somebody call me and said, work of the elder, well, that's handling the money. Well, you got to do a lot of gymnastics to only conclude that. The only evidence you have is that the apostles appeared to handle some of the money in the formation of the early church. And you get that out of Acts 5, and people would lay down the proceeds of the sale of their property and they distribute to the widows. But if you remember that it wasn't too long after that, they got into this situation where the apostles were too busy with the word of God and prayer to attend to the distribution of the funds. So that tells me then that those in spiritual leadership are not just the ones or the only ones who should actually handle the financial division of the assembly. In fact, they give that up freely so they can take care of the spiritual, the word of God, and the prayer part, the spiritual elements of the assembly. And so that's what we look for. And so when I say that to you, we had people who were confused about the work, and yet we were asking about the work, but we gave them the data of who's qualified. That was wrong. We should have taught on the work and then asked the question. So we went around and we asked now it wasn't a vote, and that was the other problem we had, was as soon as we started to sort of survey the body, what happened was people began to think it was a voting opportunity. And in North American culture like ours, we're big on voting, or it's all over the place every 4 or 2 years. And so that's natural to conclude that. What we should have done was taught on the ministry of the Spirit of God, to understand how the Spirit works and how we are to discern what the Spirit of God is doing and leading. Now that comes for a large section out of the book of Acts and some out of the epistles, where the Spirit of God is stated to be intimately connected with his word, Ephesians and Colossians. And thus, we, by saturating with the word of God, we're now looking for the hand of the Spirit of God, recognizing that we have a fleshly tainted view, and that we must even go that extra mile to make sure we are not fooled by our own flesh. Why do you say that, Steve? Because in the book of James, it specifically says, don't be deceived. So it's possible to live in the Christian life and be deceived. So we have to go that extra step with checks and balances. But what we should have done is we should have taught on the work of the Spirit of God and our necessity to discern what he's doing and how that happens. So if we would have done that first, we would have really corrected some of the problems that we ran into. Now, discerning the Spirit of God is a huge, discerning the will of God, the Spirit of God is a huge topic. For me personally, it'd take about 10 hours to teach on that. And it's a necessary one, because we're asking folks to discern what the Spirit of God is doing, not purposely, not flex your will. Not say, well, I like that guy, I don't really like that guy. That's not it. I don't care about your likes or dislikes. The Spirit of God doesn't either. What we want is a spiritually minded saint to ask the Lord, who are you identifying? So I remember one sister came and said to me, isn't it great we get to vote on the elders? I said, vote. I said, that's the last thing we're doing. In fact, that's not what we're doing at all. We are discerning. We are before God on our faces, saturated in prayer, and we are asking the Lord to show us who he's identifying. That's exactly what we're doing. And if you think you're voting and you've mistaken what this is about. This is not you vote. It's you recognizing what the Spirit of God is already doing, which is what I think they did in Acts when it says they appointed elders. They said, I see the Spirit of God working over here. I see the Spirit of God working over here. And what we did is we should have reversed our order. But, you know, we're Americans and we like to add up the math quickly. And so qualifications is an easy factor to add, right? So I would suggest that from our school of hard knocks, that you look at the sandbox corners and you proceed in sort of a strategic fashion. Now, so what we did then is we had the work of the elder, we had the Spirit of God moving and working in lives. We discern that. That's when you ask the questions: do you have a desire? And how's your character, right? If you don't do it that way, you might take 30 men from the assembly and say, are you qualified? Are you qualified? Do you have enough? But you can eliminate that if you first talk about who's doing the work and the Spirit of God identifying them. Your pool gets immediately narrowed down as we more specifically pray. And when the Lord narrowed down our pool, either by people saying, you know, I don't have that burden, we talk to a handful of people instead of like all of the men. Now, why would you want to do that? Because when you talk to a man about the work of the elder and is the Lord raising you up for this, we have to drag you through a microscope that is very difficult to remain under. I mean, you have to ask the hard questions. You have to ask about moral purity. You have to ask about blamelessness. You have to. And it has to be done politely and discreetly. And it has to be done in a manner that preserves dignity. But you have to ask the hard questions. And in our assembly, when it came time, now we didn't have elders. We had men who were working in this capacity. I ended up being asked. And I got asked some very hard personal questions. And my wife was there. And they said, no, Janet, my wife is Janet, do you feel that the Lord is laying this on your husband's heart? Do you see it too? First time they asked my wife, she said, no, I don't think so. I think Steve is too busy. I took that from the Lord. I didn't go, what are you talking about? Are you crazy? I just said, oh, okay, that must be of the Lord, because I know the Lord would work in harmony in our marriage, and she doesn't see that. I must be missing something. 1 year later, things changed in our lives. Actually, it got lighter for us. And the same question was asked again. She said, yes, I can see the Lord working in my husband's life so that he now is freed up to serve in this capacity, right? That was big. That was really big. Okay. So I was under the microscope. I was under the microscope with qualifications. I was under the microscope by the most important person in my life. Because, you know, she sees me when no one else is looking. You know, that's never pretty. And so that was part of this process. And so when you do it this way, where you look at the work of the elder and then the work of the Spirit, then you look at qualifications and desire, you really minimize the damage, collateral damage. Not every man gets their life rung through the processor, you know, and those who are put under that sort of analysis, they already have been, in a sense, vetted by doing the work of God and the Spirit of God working in their souls. So on the one side is an outside observation, the other is sort of from internal, and then you combine those together. So after that was done, we continued to pray. And when I say we continued to pray, on a Wednesday night, in our meeting, prayer meeting has always been a feature for us. So we would have, no, it wasn't always like this, but when the Lord changed us, we would have 70 to 80 people at prayer meeting, 70 to 80. Think about that. About 20 of them were kids, so it's 60 adults. And so it'd be like half men, half women. Out of that 30 men, out of all those that prayed on that Wednesday night, every one of them prayed, Lord, show us what you have as elders. Who do you have? Show us. We don't want our flesh. Lord, if there is flesh in us, remove it now. If there's flesh in the men that is dominant and we can't see it and you see it, then take that away from you. Would hear prayers like that multiple times every Wednesday night, and multiple times when we would pray in small groups or in two by twos. We were just crying out to God to purify us. And then the second thing we said is, when it's your time, you do it. We wanted to wait. We didn't force it. That's very important. We didn't force it. We waited. And when the Lord recognized elders for us, it was such a clean event that no one left. No one got upset and left. No one said, well, that's it. I thought I was going to be, I'm out of here. What happened was the whole body took a deep breath of sigh of relief, and we immediately started to grow, literally within 1 week. The very next Sunday, the guy comes in. He says, I was late, which isn't a good thing, but I was late that day. And he said, hey, we're out just visiting churches today, and we wanted to know if we could come by and visit your church. I said, well, you would be most welcome to visit us today. He said, I don't really know much about your church, but can you tell me what goes on here? I said, well, sure. I said, what you're about to enter into is to witness the breaking of bread. Now, that's what you would probably call a communion service. And so I explained it to him. Now, usually if you're first time here, we kind of like you to sit back and watch. But there are circumstances in which we may not always do that. He said, well, what are those? I said, well, can I ask you some personal questions? He goes, yeah. I said, do you know the Lord Jesus Christ as your personal Savior who died on the cross for your sins and rose again? He just said, without a doubt, I most certainly do. I said, well, that's fantastic. I said, my next question is a little harder. He goes, what's that? I said, do you think with a clear conscience you've been walking in the light? He paused. He looked at his wife. This is all in the parking lot. And he goes, I think so. I said, well, why don't you join us today and the elders will follow up and meet with you. He goes, great. They stayed with us for 15 years. All right. The very next Sunday. You see, so I interpreted that as the Spirit of God honoring our feeble, sometimes mistaken ways of execution, sometimes mistaken strategy. But we were trying to stay within those four-cornered principles of elder recognition. So that's how we did it. In hindsight, as I mentioned to you, I do some things differently. But that pattern became the pattern that we used to identify those who the Lord was sending out into his field. And so prayer was saturated. We as elders would pray. We would have a sense of peace. We would ask the brothers to present their burden before the assembly. The whole assembly was involved in praying. And if there were problems, we would want to solve them with each other. So that pattern became a real specific process for us on other events. And we do the same thing for elders today. And we recently recognized 2 elders about a year and a half ago. And we went through the same process. And so the Lord taught us very early on this thing. So I hope that is not too confusing. I took a few rabbit trails in there, but I hope that maybe gives some clarity to it. Now, let me just address going the next level. So we got to the point where we could see that the Lord was seems like he was solidifying the meeting of maybe 3 or 4 elders coming together. We did not take the next Sunday and go, woohoo, let's go, and you're elders. We didn't do that. We presented those individual names to the assembly, and we prayed for another year. And then we asked those three men, I was one of them, to pray together. And we prayed for a season, almost a full year. And what we did about is we would meet regularly and cry out to the Lord about the needs of the assembly. Couldn't help but do that. The spiritual needs of the assembly. And then we would ask the Lord to show us. And if there was something that he did not, that was wrong with any one of us, he would take us out of this consideration. And we just laid ourselves out before the Lord to let him do his examining work. And we asked the assembly to pray the same way. And now we were down to 3 or 4 names that were very specific. One of those guys said, I don't think the Lord would have me do this after months of praying. I think the Lord would have me step back. And we respected that, right? We did that because we recognized that flesh is, by its very nature, is very deceptive. Think about it. Whose flesh is that? Whose spiritual DNA is that? Well, it's Satan's, right? The old man. Now, what is Satan known for? Lying, deceiving. So if you have the spiritual DNA that was rendered powerless at the cross, but still influential in the believer's thinking, what's the primary way the flesh is going to try to operate? To influence you, to lie to you. And so we recognize that the flesh within us, in its influential state, no longer powerful, but influential state, can easily fool us into thinking we're perfectly sincerely right when we're categorically wrong. So that was the Laodicean problem, right? They actually thought they were rich and had need of nothing, but instead they're rather wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked. That's an atrocity, to think you're really healthy when you're actually the worst health condition you've ever been in. And we saw that we could do that. We learned that from the previous generation, right? And so that's why we spent even more time after we narrowed it all down to, say, 3 or 4 guys, where we prayed for a healthy season. It was a year for us, but it may not be a year for you. But that's what we were doing. We were trying to assure before the throne of God, through the Spirit of God's discernment leading, that our hearts were not right. Now, where else did I get that? That was the book of Acts. You remember when they selected Matthias? Remember when they drew lots and everything? Do you remember what they prayed? Lord, you know all men's hearts. Show us who it is. See that? They were thinking about the flesh. And that's why we did what we did. We were using prayer in this capacity to guard against that. Because it's terrible. It's more of a difficulty to, as you know, to recognize elders who were not identified by the Spirit of God to be elders. That's a worse state. And we didn't want that, because we had a generation that did that before. We didn't want that. So we were going to wait. And when we waited, the blessing we received post-recognition after we waited on the Lord was so abundant, our assembly grew and grew. And at one point we were at 80 kids for Kids Club. 80 kids, that's like a daycare on steroids. And all these kids, they were from broken homes, and they just wanted to be loved, and God gave them to us. And so we grew and we grew, and the Lord solidified the elders, and we had a unique bond that eldership needs to have. And the body was loved, and they were cared for, and we loved them, and we labored in prayer. And literally we would spend some of our elders meetings just praying for the body. And we would get done, and we think that was the best elders meeting we ever had in our lives. So these are some of the blessings that I believe we had because of this sort of waiting upon the Lord, not rushing it, and being man enough to say, honest enough is the better way, to say, you know what, I think I might have too much flesh, that the Lord needs to work on that with me or through me, work it out of me. I think maybe I should hold back, or I should maybe the Lord has prepared me, and being honest with it. And so that's what we ask the Lord to do. The phrase in the Bible is the sincerity of heart. It's under the bigger topic of authentic Christianity, which I found out in my recent study is such a big issue with God, authenticness. He wants true worshipers. The adjective true means authentic and genuine, unhypocritical. And that's what he's looking. So that's why we spent that extra effort just to assure ourselves. We didn't rush it, nor did we set timetables. When it was right, the Lord would tell us it was right. And he did. And we were very happy to wait. Okay, I've gone on for probably somewhere around 40 minutes now. And I don't know if I've generated questions, but maybe this would be a good time to ask those questions. And I'll ask the Lord for his insight to answer them, if he would grant that to me. Let me just, while you're thinking of questions, let me just sort of review in my mind if there is anything else. There's one thing. One of the things that needed to be maintained in this whole ordeal was humility. No, if any one of us had this idea that we were the next greatest thing, or that we were the designated pseudo apostle to name elders or whatever, we felt that was a dangerous attitude. We were beggars, or we were lepers, and we found food, and we needed to continue to remember that we were humble lepers. And so humility became a large part of our prayer time. And the way the Lord taught me that was through medicine. The moment I began to think I really knew emergency medicine well was the very next moment I almost killed a patient. And there's nothing like that in your life to reset your humility clock. And the Lord would do that systematically with each of us. And he would keep us humble, and he kept our assembly humble. It's very important as a body and as individuals, we recognize that thinking of ourselves as independent agents of God is a very, very dangerous fleshly thing, even if you're right. The independent spirit is never justification for being right. And so we put a lot of effort into that aspect of, how do we say, discipline of the soul. And to this day, that's still a very important part of our elders' meetings. So I hope that puts a nice exclamation point on a feature that is very intangible. Okay, I can be quiet now and listen to your comments or questions if you'd like. I hope I haven't bored you to tears.
Hey, Steve, this is Matt. Before we get into the questions too much, can you give us the four corners?
Oh, sure.
In the order that you would approach them now, kind of the order of importance that you would do them now.
Sure. If I were to do them today, I would suggest you teach on one aspect of theology, and that would be the Holy Spirit, or pneumatology, with a specific focus on how the Spirit leads, and that's like a healthy look at Acts, and how we discern the Spirit's leading. That would be very important, because it's the Spirit of God who made them elders, so we better know what he's doing. And when you do that, of course, you have to address the flesh and its own will. The second thing I would do is talk about the work of the elder, because that's very highly associated with recognition. And I think it's important that we all work from the same grid of the work of the elder. I begin with the Holy Spirit because I think it's always safer to begin with the Trinity, at least an element of the Trinity and his place above, what we do. But the work is very important. And some of that work load, if you will, comes from Psalm 23, Ezekiel 34, 1 Peter 5, Acts 28, the standard passages. And I would add that we taught on last time, John 10. So those are, to me, high value targets to discuss the work of the elder. The third thing I talk about would be the qualifications, right? And then the last thing I talk about, which is generally the private conversation, the desire, right? You got a guy who's really qualified, but he wants to go finish his career, well, or do something else, then maybe his desire isn't there. So those are the four corners that I would talk about in that order.
Thank you.
I hope that was helpful. That was very helpful for us. I hope it's helpful for you. That just gave us a starting point. All right.
So we'll just go ahead, and if you have a question, go ahead and just unmute yourself and ask away.
Okay, I have a question. So say you have have someone who would be what you would recognize as qualified as an elder, or is doing that in some capacity. What role would that person's wife play in them being an elder if, say, for example, she didn't want that or whatever?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. Now, when I described what we did, I specifically included the description of the wife's opinion of some of the qualifications. Now, what that means is the wife, by definition, must be very spiritually minded, right? That she's not into a power play either, where my husband becomes an elder and I can kind of like manipulate my husband to do what I want anyway. That is all flesh. That's definitely all flesh. And so it's we thought the wife's input was important because she knows this man the best. But obviously, when you recognize elders, you're recognizing the gentleman, but the wife as is the helpmeet rescuer will be involved with the work, right? With the work, and some of that work is in the practical areas of hospitality, but also sometimes the wife is involved in shepherding counseling because it's better done with a couple, with a young woman instead of a man and a young woman. So we do not necessarily emphasize the idea that the wife will co-labor with her husband as an elder. We don't think that's biblical, but we also would be putting our heads in the sand if we didn't recognize there was some collaborative effort that happens between a husband and wife in the shepherding capacities. And so we do address that with our wives in terms of spiritually mindedness and qualifying. Now, there's an area of eldership with wives that probably needs to be stated without hiding it. And that's this issue of confidentiality. And in medicine and the litigation world, confidentiality is like drilled into your brain, and I've got laws called HIPAA laws. And, I can't tell you anything about certain people and stuff like that. Well, in a similar sense, an elder has a trust of confidentiality. Now, what that means between a husband and wife, because husband and wives usually share about everything together. I mean, there's usually nothing held back, as it should be. But in the world of eldering, there are things that cannot be described in the detail that you might have heard them. So with my wife, and let me just say why. So the reason why is because some of that is very, very raw to the ear. The scripture says what is done in secret, some of that should stay silent, And so, when your wife, if you're going to spill all of that and vomit it on your wife's earlobes, that you almost sort of violate her conscience and spirit. And so what we have said what we've practiced and said to our elders who come on board is, we really can't always say everything because it is a breach of confidentiality unless I have permission to say so. So if I'm dealing with a young man and he's telling me that he's called up 1-800, come and visit me at my houseboy thing, and he went and slept with a prostitute, then I say, no, that's a pretty serious thing. You need to know that I need to communicate that to my fellow elders. And then I would say, is this something that I can share with my wife? And just because he grants me permission doesn't mean I actually do it. If my wife is there and she might know that so-and-so slept with somebody who could be our daughter, I don't tell her that. I would say things like, well, sexual immorality is a huge area of that person's life. And that's all I'd say. Sometimes I can't even say that. I'd say, well, they're struggling with multiple areas with their flesh. So I just generalize the statement. And my wife would then understand that she doesn't need to know, we have an agreement that she doesn't need to know all those dirty details because it would stumble her. But instead she says, I get the general picture, that's it. And thank you. And that's all. And so we, ask me about wives, brother. That's a facet of eldering that I think is very important to keep in mind. I don't think we should hide things from each other. We just might not be able to be as specific. We might have to speak in general terms. And my wife and I just have that agreement that if I have to speak in general terms, it's not because I'm hiding it from you, it's because it's really too caustic to hear. It's kind of like when you're watching a TV show and it's too violent, right? And you need to cover your eyes. And that's my responsibility to protect you. So if I have to be general, know that it's not meant to subvert our marriage. It's just too vicious for you. And I want to protect you. So I might use general descriptions of categories that she gets the general idea. So I probably took a tangent, but hopefully that helps you.
Steve, I would add one more thing. It to keep a confidentiality is often a burden. And if you give it to your wife, many wives can't bear the burden and they'll share it with someone else just out of it just being too heavy of a burden for them to bear by themselves, knowing this information.
Absolutely.
And I've counseled a number of couples that have come to me because they don't feel they can go to the elders in their own assembly, because when they have gone with an issue, that issue has spread through the assembly and everybody was aware of it because they shared it with their wives. So it's a huge issue. It's a huge issue.
Yeah. One of the things I think is very important to help the longevity of the assembly is to know that your elders are safe havens of information. But I definitely will say to a person, I need to share this with my fellow elders. No, you can't do that. Then I said, then you can't tell me. I said, it's just that simple. And so I really try to get that issue settled from the front end. But wives, I love my wife. But quite honestly, there is some stuff I've heard I would never want her to know. It's just that bad. It's just terrible. So you're right, Brother Clay. I agree with you 100%. And guarding this sense of confidence in the oversight about sordid details is a very key thing.
I guess that's kind of what I was getting at, is that qualifying an elder is also qualifying the wife as well, to where she is going to be responsible as an elder's wife as well.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with you at all. I don't think there is the same how do I say this? I don't think when we say qualify a wife, I don't think that's talking about everything listed in 1 Timothy 3, but there, or Titus chapter 2. But definitely there is key elements that ought to be placed, and that falls under the top, the guise of Titus 2, where it talks about older women and how they carry themselves and what they teach the younger women. So I think that's where you make the case for that, for sure.
Yep, agreed. That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Great question. That's a tough one. Mhm.
It is possible for a wife to be such a wife that she could disqualify someone from being an elder, I think is one of the points.
That's kind of what I was getting at. Yes, exactly.
I would agree with that. I've seen that happen, I've seen that happen. I'm actually more worried about me disqualifying myself. But yeah, I've seen it happen. Yeah.
Okay, so I have a nuts and bolts logistics question. So one of the things you said is that they questioned you and your wife's presence, and then they questioned your wife. This is previous to your having elders. So who is the they? Who was this committee that you put together to do some of these things?
We asked the Lord, well, in our times of prayer, and the men would gather to pray. This was in addition to praying along with my other brother. We asked the Lord, should we ask these questions to the body? I mean, because it appeared that there was an element of the body gathered in that visit with Paul. And so through that time, we felt at peace about asking 3 brothers to help with us. Now, was that a biblical practice? And the answer is, it was a principle that led to a practice, but I can't say the practice was biblical. We took a principle and we applied it. And the principle was how Paul conducted that, going back and establishing assemblies. There is an inherent danger in that, and that some of those that we might ask to do that, they can't have selfish agendas. That comes from Paul's statements out of Philippians. And I can tell you that when we first did it, we had some men that had selfish agendas, which was unrecognized. And so that step alone, where we asked some brothers to do so, really we should have spent a little bit more time in prayer and discernment before we went that way. Some would say, well, you shouldn't have gone that way at all, and just the Lord will just tell everybody, and that'll be that, and it'll be a sort of an epiphany moment where the assembly will just wake up one day and say, oh, they're the elders. And I would say, well, he's certainly not bound by me to lead and guide as he wants. And I would say, if what the Lord does, that other mechanism, then great. But that's not how the Lord led us. At least I don't think he led us that way. I think he led us to ask some spiritually minded men. And I think we just rushed it. So does that answer your question, Clay?
So of those men, 3 men, I think you mentioned as a number, of those 3 men, how many ended up being actual elders when all was said and done?
0.
Okay. So they didn't presume, because they were selected for this task, that they were on the front burner for being elders then?
No.
Did you select people you thought were not going to be elders, but were spiritual men?
The main criteria we had was spiritually minded individuals. We tried to be very careful not to think from they probably could be one. We didn't want anybody that thought they could be one, because they would bias. They had the potential to bias in a discussion that's in a home. Who do you think's being an elder? I mean, after all, I'm here asking you, right? They could easily bias that kind of thing. So we were looking for those who did not have that desire of themselves as we went, because we just wanted to remove the conflict of interest parameter.
So what timeline are you looking at? Because you mentioned that these men asked you a question and a year later they asked you a question. So there seems to be appointment of some type of a committee of 3 men to start asking these questions, and at least a year's lapse of time before any decisions were made.
So and that's a good question, because I blurred all the timelines in it. But when we got to a point as an assembly that we felt the Lord was wanting us to pursue oversight, we taught on these 4 corners as feebly as we did. We prayed for probably about, I'd say, 6 months or so, and the Lord would show us who we'd have to go around and ask these questions. And these questions were very scripted, and they were very, you had to stay, we wanted you to stay to these questions. We wrote them out. That took 3 months, and to visit every family and family unit. I mean, and you're visiting like 2 or 3 people a week, you know. And then after that, we sat down as a group and we said, well, here's what the body discerns at this time that the Spirit of God is doing. Now, again, we recognized our flesh is very deceptive. So we took those from that conclusion, and we did not immediately recognize them. We had them meet together to pray, and that took a year. So we took those men, we talked to their wives, and then nothing was recognized. It took a year after that. And then over that year's time, the Lord actually did quite a few changes, and then recognized men. So that it, you know, start to finish, it was around 18 to 24 months.
If I can ask, how big was your congregation when you're doing this?
100. That's men, women, children, cats, dogs, and mice. Adults, probably 75 to 80. Today, we're about 120. The Lord had us at one point at 175, 180, and people moved away, and we had some people leave. That's a discussion for another day, how that all happens. But the Lord got us down to about 120 very committed people, very committed.
So given the size of your congregation versus, say, Palms, we're much more, there's a lot less of us, so I would call us pretty intimate. Would you suggest any changes to that pattern, I guess?
The strategy that I outlined?
Yeah.
Oh, you know, well, that's a very good question, Matt. The thing is that I think you look at the principles that you can make decisions from, and then tailor that to you. So if I was in your assembly, we'll say, is probably the best way I can answer that. And I don't know all the ins and outs of your assembly. I'm not that familiar with you as a brethren, and sisters. But I would say that I see if I can be specific. I would say, brothers, we need to come together and pray. And I don't care if we Zoom it or in person, and let's pray consistently every Sunday evening at 6 o'clock, just about this issue. Then I'd say, you ladies, you come together every Sunday evening at 6 o'clock, and you just pray about it. Don't talk about it, just pray. All right. And you're asking the Lord, and you give the body sample things to ask the Lord, 3 specifics that you don't want to deviate from. And I'd do that for a season. Okay. And then as you're doing that, you're asking the Lord, do you want us to have some unbiased, if we may, individuals take a pulse on what the body sees the Spirit of God doing, or do you want us to wait? That's the question I'd ask. And if the Lord gives you the green light, then of course your next question is, Lord, who would you have that be? And if the Lord doesn't give the green light, then it's not time, and you keep asking the Lord to hone us, shape us, mature us, cause us to see, cause us to be discerning, show us how we should be discerning, right? But if the Lord gives you the green light, then you ask the Lord who that should be. And as I mentioned to Clay just a minute ago, it's almost wiser, at least from a logical perspective, to those who have no vested interest, right? That is, they may not think of themselves as elders. And sometimes that's a really, really, really good deacon. And that's the next step then. And I think you could do that. It should be, in my opinion, more than one. It should be at least two and possibly three. And then when that point comes, if the Lord leads you to ask the body what the Spirit of God is doing, and by the way, that means you've been teaching on this all along, right? You're not giving the body no information, you're giving the body good information. So that when the group goes and maybe asks, have you been praying about what the Spirit of God is doing? If the answer is, well, no, we haven't, then that ends if you're done. But to say, yes, we have, and we've asked the Lord to show us. All right, good. Now, question number 2, has the Lord impressed upon you a brother that is doing the work of the elder? Right, that's all you're asking, right? And number 3, you usually say, do you sense that the Spirit of God is raising this person up? All right, those are the 3 questions right there. And so as you gather that, it doesn't become public knowledge. You bring it back to the brothers that have been praying, the brothers that have been meeting. You sort of put the information together, and I pray over it. Lord, if this is bad information, we're doing the wrong thing, burn it now. Each time I want to make sure I'm not running in the flesh. And then when it comes time, you say, it seems like the Lord has identified, and this is you do publicly, it seems like the Lord has identified these 3 things, these 3 brothers will say. And I would present that to the assembly and say, no, we're not recognizing them. We are now going to enter into another season where we ask the Lord to confirm this to us. We're going to ask these 3 brothers to pray together specifically, and we are going to pray for them. And that's the next phase of that. It took us a year. And during that beginning of that year, we talked to those 3 brothers about it and say, this is pretty serious consideration. And we talk to the wives at that point, and then we pray for another season. So that maybe adds the meat to the skeletons, Matt, I think is what you're asking me. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Steve, this is Dave. I got just a question on your teaching. Did you do it at Family Bible Hour? Did you do it just on Wednesday nights? Did you have special Bible studies for this? And
Yeah.
did you do the teaching exclusively once you started? You stayed on that subject until you taught it all?
Yeah. Well, of course, back then we didn't have elders. So what we had was a speakers committee, which is an extra biblical concept. And so what we did as a speakers committee is we asked the Lord, what was the diet for the assembly? And we recognized a couple of things. We recognized that eating mashed potatoes every day is not very good for you, right? Eating hot dogs every day is unhealthy. Eating steak for you is not good. So we recognize that the body has to have a time to digest. So we might take 4 weeks and we would teach on the topic. Then we take a break. And we do it during the Family Bible Hour. We pick the time where we would have maximum attendance. In our assembly, we feel that the assembly is to edify the body, right? We are not against preaching the gospel, and any speaker at any time can divert and preach the gospel as the Spirit of God leads them. But other than the Spirit of God's redirection, we through prayer, we'll want to cover this topic over, say, for example, these 4 weeks, and then we take a break. And maybe it'll be another topic, or maybe an exposition out of the book of Philippians for several weeks. Then we'll pick it back up. And we do this intermittent type of discussion. Now, in reality, for us, it was a 6 to 8 week block. It wasn't always the same speaker, but many times I was the speaker. And, you know, series teaching is exactly what an elder has to do at some point in his life. So that was good training for me personally. And so we mixed it up a little bit. And so sometimes it was this, sometimes it was that. We tried to stay away from once a month, 12 months a year. There's too much discontinuity to that. We felt that spread it out too much. So does that answer your question?
Yes, it does, sir. Thank you very much.
It's late and Rashawn wanted to hold it to 9:30, so I know it's very late for Steve.
No, I'm good.
I've seen Steve up later than this, so by the way, so but do you want another session? You want to ask a few more questions? You don't all have to speak at once, but
Maybe
I wasn't going to interrupt the questions just because the hour is up. If there are any more questions that anyone would like to ask, I think we should ask that. But if not, we can wind up. We can wait a minute or so to see if anyone has any questions.
I think another session or two would not hurt us. I think it would help us tremendously if Steve has the time.
I
I think there might be more questions later.
Yeah. I think you're wise. After you've had a chance to think about it, pray about it, you may have more questions.
So one question, Steve, is do you have an age range target that you think in terms of for elders?
That's a great question. And the answer is that we primarily looked at spiritual maturity, but by default, spiritual maturity will usually include a measurement of age. We did not pick any numbers such as, 30 or 40. We didn't do the Levitical 30 through 50 thing. But I can tell you that in our assembly, we ended up with a brother in his 30s. Actually, he was 29 when he was recognized. A brother who was 39, that was me. And a brother who was 49, that was Rob Kerr. And we realized that having our men at different decades or seasons of life was incredibly valuable. So we didn't have a hard and fast rule. We sort of gauged it in hindsight over the spectrum of people to shepherd, and the Lord identified people that were in those different spectrums. And in hindsight, we thought that was so much wiser than what we had in mind. And in fact, the other elder that we eventually ended up, he was 69 to 70. So we had one from each sort of bracket, if you will. And that was our experience. Did that answer your question, brother?
Yes, thank you.
so one of the questions that always comes up, especially with younger elders, is since they're still raising their family, you were raising your family for a long time. How much does it take away from their family if they're really busy as elders?
Yeah, no, that's really good, perceptive question. So when you talk about, let me just take a step back from that and then answer your question, Clay. When you talk about qualifications, there's certain stipulations in there of examples of blamelessness and, rules your own house well, that one there, right? How you know how to rule the house of God unless you know how to rule your own house. Now, there is different pictures, different evidences of what it means to rule your own house. When they're 5 years and below, that looks different than when they're 15 years and below, right? because there's maturity, there's independence and all that. Whatever age of family you have at that time is what you use as your yardstick. So that's, I think, how you measure this qualification of family metric. Now, when you have, now to answer your question, Clay, if you have a young guy who's 29 and another guy who's 39, it's not just the size of family, it's their workload in the secular world. It's their involvement in other community activities. And clearly you have to make some decisions, maybe to unload some of those, but you can't unload your kids. That's not going to work. So what we recognized in our group was everybody's wheelbarrow is a different size. And you may have a smaller wheelbarrow, or your wheelbarrow is the same. Yours already got it filled with 9 kids. That was me. And so we didn't have the same expectation of workload for each elder. We accepted the fact that each elder would have a different amount of contribution, and we gave permission for that to be stated. And so if like one of the elders, he was young, he was about 29, and his wife had lupus, and she was really sick the first year. And so we just told him, don't even think about coming to an elders meeting, but we will keep you informed. Your wheelbarrow is already full. You know, that so confirmed and affirmed him that he trusted his fellow elders, so that when his wife was better and the family was back on his feet, he was outstanding. He was carrying 1.5 times the workload for us. But it was because we gave deference and dignity to a season when he couldn't carry the load. And so that's how we think about it. Every wheelbarrow is either a different size or already filled, and we'll respect that aspect of a person's life. So there was a while in there when my kids were getting older and I had more time. You know, I was doing 2 and 3 times what the other guy was doing. But I chose not to be embittered about that. That's not right for me. It's kind of like that principle with funds. You know, you give over here because they have a need, but there will be a time when the Lord will use them to give back to you. You know, that principle out of Corinthians. And we adapted that to workload decisions and expectations in the oversight. And so the younger you are, certainly you have those limitations, but sometimes you got all teenagers, and you know, teenagers, whoo, boy, that's a lot more work. When it's easier when they're 3, because they don't, you know, they just got to obey. When they're 17, they want to talk to 2 a.m. Good grief, you know. I think that's a good one. Huh? Yeah. So anyway, that's I think, does that answer your question, brother? That's kind of how we process that.
Danny, did you have a question?
I was just talking to my wife, but I had the same question Clay had, but the other one we've discussed before as well is, I would just be curious of what Steve's thoughts are on term limits.
Oh, term limits. Wow, you're going for all the big areas, aren't you? Danny, that's a good question. Now this is my opinion, okay? So you understand where I'm coming from. In the scriptures, the one place that gives, quote, term limits is the Levitical priesthood order. I think it was age 50 or something. And then there was the idea of going to war. You know, you don't go the first year after you're married, that kind of thing. So the Old Testament Mosaic law had, if you will, a semblance of term limits or terms of service in terms of a timeline. I cannot say I see that in the New Testament, right? I don't know if it's there. And plus we're in a different dispensation theologically, so I'm not sure you could extrapolate that over, unless Paul did it, which he didn't. So the point is that those are principles to remember, but I'm not sure how far you can apply them. So what we do about term limits is not go by chronological years. We do it if there's a change in those four corners. If there's a change in qualifications, probably should step down. A change in desire. Well, the Lord's leading me to be a missionary to, Indonesia. Okay, you have a desire, it's just not here, right? If there's a change in the Spirit of God is redirecting, taking you out. That's how does he do that? Well, I had a stroke, that's pretty clear. That's an obvious one. And then of course, there's a cessation of doing the work. And so that sort of dictates when the term is up, as opposed to a hard and fast number of years. Does that answer your question for you?
Yes, that was very good.
That's
the only thing.
That's predicated on choosing the right people.
Yeah, absolutely. All this is subject to this idea that we've done our due diligence in it. So. Yeah, I'm sorry, Danny, I cut you off. I apologize.
No, the only thing I would add is just recognizing when those limits have been reached, like you were mentioning, instead of someone having no choice but carry it on, or
that you raise a very important question, and that's like, well, what if it's obvious to everybody else that maybe you're not within those four corners anymore? And that's where I think it's important, two things. You develop this culture of humility, and the culture of humility really can be expressed in this way. I recognize that I am expendable in this oversight, right? See, what happens to elders is we think, well, if I don't do it, no one else will. So, this place can't function without me. Now, I think that's a dangerous attitude. Because what I found is that the Lord took away all the shepherds and the Lord still shepherded the meeting. There is someone who is still qualified. It's the Lord Jesus, and he's really good at it. And so I think we want to have that sense of, healthy perception of who we are and really who we're not. And when you have that baseline attitude, then what happens is revisiting the work of the Spirit of God in each individual's life every, say, year or period of time is an easy discussion, because we want the right answer. We don't want a legacy. And that's how you can keep yourself open to the hard answers. Some men get in, like he was an older brother, 69, 70, and he said, brothers, the God has set it on my heart to be an elder, but I recognize I have a short lifespan. He said that from day one. And what he meant was we should be training new elders as we go, as we speak. And I was a young elder. I go, okay. I mean, he was right. So I hope that answers your question in terms of how to deal with maybe a brother that should probably step down, but doesn't want to answer that question. It's a hard thing. Your identity is wrapped up in your service. To take a step back, you're almost saying, I have no more identity. The rest of us should be very sensitive to that and understand that, and yet mitigate for that in his life. That's us helping a weaker brother in that sense.
Yeah, I feel like that was very well answered. Those last comments were good.
Yeah, I think just for background, for where we left and when we came to Palms, the status quo was once you're an elder till the day you die. So I don't see that that's part of your answer at all, unless God has that for you,
Yeah. I agree with that, unless the Lord has that. But but it's important to ask the Lord that question regularly. I mean, don't we do that almost in every phase of our life? Lord, is this still what you're doing? But why do we suspend that in the question of the longevity of the elder? I understand the argument that, you know, the Spirit of God made you an elder, the Spirit of God will remove you from an elder. But I said the same thing, but I just included it in the four corners discussion.
Well, it gets back to work. Ultimately, it's a work. And when you're unable to do the work because of hearing loss, stroke, memory, age in general, then that's a corner of the work you're no longer able to do. I know it's hard to recognize that in many people, but it's important to understand that when you reach that point, probably it's time to step aside.
Yeah, you're right, Blake. That's exactly right. And there's other things, you know, you don't have the emotional capacity to handle things anymore. Juggling 20 things is not your forte, right? Is not doable anymore. But what I think is so important is you've, over the years, created a sense of a culture or an expectation that if you need to step back, it is not a failure. It is wisdom, and we all respect wisdom. And I think that gives permission for a brother who might feel, well, I'm being put out to pasture, to recognize, no. In fact, you gain dignity by recognizing limitation. That's how we want to handle this. And we do that by honoring one another. So.
And there are men that are older that are still quite capable of doing it. So I'm not trying to say that older men, you know, that they can't do it or they're too old to do it. I'm not saying that at all. So
well let me address that for a minute. So we have elders, and then we have men who are not elders, but they're still shepherds. And so we ask those men, because you just don't quit being a sheepdog, you know. We ask those men to not give up, but we ask them not to bear the responsibility of shepherding. And so we will be very strategic. We'll have a brother, he's 70, he's 80. He is a great hospital visitor. I mean, he's does it flawlessly. We'll call him and say, brother, we are going to be tied up. We would like you to go visit so-and-so for us. And would you get back with us and giving us a report on that, so we can go. And so we kind of give specific, forgive me, assignments to those who are still doing the work of shepherding, but don't have the capacity to serve in the responsibility of the oversight. And that really helps bridge this exit without a loss of dignity.
Okay, we have 6 minutes to 9. Maybe we have room for one more question, but we could stop at 9 and maybe have a follow-up session if we need to. So maybe one more question if someone has any. Okay,
I'll just make a comment. Steve, you mentioned about the Lord changing maybe the exercise, and somebody may leave an eldership and go into the mission field or something. There's an older brother that attended Palms for a little bit. He's 95 or 96 now. And he always felt that elders that maybe had gotten too old or you know, the mental capacity or their health or whatever would make really good church planters, you know. So I do think that it's not an out to pasture, hey, the Lord's done with you. Just like if you were entering the eldership, you know, whatever you were involved in before, you're not done with that. It's just another phase. I think you did a really good job emphasizing how that's okay. You know, that the Lord doesn't just raise us up for one thing and then that's it, you know.
Yeah. No, it's well said, brother. Well said. Maybe I could just end with a closing comment, if that's all right, Ocean, just for a second. However the Lord leads you, there is an unspoken thing to think about. And this is how I heard it expressed, which I totally stole from my fellow elder. When we were recognized, he said, it was Rob Kerr, what a guy. He said, you know, when elders are recognized in some assemblies, they distribute uniforms for them. And I'm going, oh my, Rob, where are you going with this? You know, I don't want to wear a no collar thing. What are you talking about? And he goes, those uniforms have concentric circles on the front and they have concentric circles on the back. Well, what is that? It's a bullseye. And he actually said that. He said, that's a bullseye so that if you miss the front, you can always hit the back. And then in his classic Rob Kerr Canadian fashion said, let's not distribute those uniforms here. I thought that was brilliant. I wish I would have wrote it and thought it, but I stole it, okay? And as you go forward, I think that's important to recognize. These brothers are not infallible. They should be very humble. And these brothers are not the Lord. The Lord is the Lord. And if we don't have that straight, we set ourselves up for failed expectations. That is one of the biggest areas that causes disintegration from within.
All right, Steve, maybe you can close us out in prayer.
I'll be happy to. Thank you for inviting me, and I pray that you would have been blessed by the Lord. Dear Lord, wow, we've been talking about your field. It's shepherding. You're not just a shepherd, you're a good shepherd, is how the scripture says, a good shepherd. It means there must be some bad ones out there. You're a good shepherd. All we desire is to learn from you. Father, we've got a lot of influences and the enemy's darts and fiery arrows, and we've got our own flesh, and then the world screaming in our ears, and then we've got our own set of personal bitternesses and biases. And you know, Father, if it were me, I wouldn't mess with us. That's too many variables to navigate. But Father, you say, well, you know, it may be a lot, but greater is he who is in them than he who is in the world. And my presence has a way of dispelling all that which is in opposition. Oh, Father, I ask you to look at the Palms Assembly. I ask you to look healthily at them and give them your great blessing of bringing unity and harmony as they would obey you in seeking your will for oversight. I pray that you would it's silly for me to say this, but Father, clarity is a desire of their heart. But I also pray that you would give them the heart to obey what you're clear in, and that they would trust in you and that obedience to you. And if by chance they're going a different direction, you would auto-correct them so that they're following after you, even if they don't know it. And I pray that you would rear up both men and women who are singularly living in the fear of the Lord. And out of that group, you would show the assembly, the elders that you are preparing. And you would continue to prepare them, and more in years, decades to come. I pray, Father. Father, it's your work. It's your Son. He is the head of the church. We are just seeking you to exercise your headship. We don't want to thwart you, grieve you, slow you down. So I pray that for the assembly in Palms and Phoenix. And I ask you that you would do this in the name the beautiful name of your Son. And we declare to you his incredible worth to our lives, to our souls, to our adoration and our affection. In Jesus' name,